When a fashion designer creates a garment, he or she always creates that garment to be seen in movement. They never think, I'll draw this dress, it'll only be seen from one angle static. They always create it to be worn, and always create it to be seen in movement. So if you're just really sort of taking the dictum of form follows function, the best way of showing that garment is in movement, because then you see it how the designer intended it. Now, for the previous almost 100 years, we've accepted that fashion photography, and then prior to that, fashion illustration, was the best way to show fashion. And to a certain degree it was, because you had the magazines set up and they were a very good vehicle to present fashion. Once you have the internet, and once you have a sort of, a vehicle which is accessible to everybody, you all of a sudden have a very exciting new medium. The reason I started SHOWstudio was that back in 1998, it seemed fairly clear that the internet was going to become a really important global communication network. And if you can show fashion in that way, in movement, it's much closer to designers' intentions, and therefore probably a much better way of showing fashion. That doesn't do down fashion photography. What I'm saying is, there is a new medium now. There is a new medium because it's supported by the internet of fashion film. And one of the reasons I started SHOWstudio was to give fashion film a platform. Much in the same way that if you think about it, back in approximately 100 years before that, around 1910, Vogue magazine went from fashion illustration and supported fashion photography. It took a long time, incidentally, for fashion photography to really establish itself as the medium we understand now. Now, if you think about where we are with fashion film now, you've only got 1 or 2 people doing it really well in any case. Lots of people trying, but the medium's inventing itself. I don't have any problem with that, because fashion photography probably took until the 1960s to invent itself and to actually be the recognizable art form that we talk about. When you say fashion photography, you recognize quite easily Avedon, Penn, Bailey, Bourdin, Newton, Weber, Meisel. Those, you can imagine what that is, but that took a long time to define itself as a medium. Fashion film is going through a similar sort of self-definition, discovery, deciding its own parameters. Fashion film is very different from film, in the same way that fashion photography is very different from photography. If you'd ask me what makes a great fashion film, it's very easy to answer. Great fashion makes a great fashion film. The narrative is already in that piece of clothing. So the narrative is already, if you want, inside the dress or the suit or the skirt or whatever it is, the designer's already created that vision. So the narrative is all there. Every piece of clothing speaks. It's always got an intention behind it. It's always got a desire behind it. And especially if you've got very elevated fashion, like the work of John Galliano, Alexander McQueen, or Rei Kawakubo, or Yohji Yamamoto, or great fashion designers like that, then of course they're rich with narrative. They're rich with thought. They're great seams of expression that you just have to start to look how they move, the colour, the shapes, the juxtaposition, the cuts, the historical references. It's all there. So putting a sort of an event sequence on that, by event sequence, that's what I mean by narrative, seems totally superfluous. I think we have to say that there's a new term for the sort of work that I create. It isn't photography anymore, and I think it does it a disservice to try and define it as photography. Photography was a very clearly defined medium by a set of parameters, and perhaps 30 years ago, when I first started it, you could define photography by a very clear set of rules, and that was easy to understand. Almost since I've started it, there's been a shift in the definition of what I do and the definition of what photography is, and I've got further and further away from that. Photography stopped when the digital world came along, and that's when we should let it be what it was, defined by its own parameters. I think to a certain degree, the people that should have upheld photography, the magazines really, they should have championed photography and let it move more gracefully into becoming a new medium, didn't. There wasn't a great sort of uplifting of photography and its new capabilities. There was a sort of reining in of it and a dumbing down of photography and a trivializing of photography as an art medium by forcing it backwards. And I think that's very bad. I think it killed off photography. This is a big argument you can have. I'm 54. You can have this argument now at 54. But I think actually, for most people coming up now in their late teens, early 20s, 30s, 40s, certainly people up to their 30s, it's not an argument they want to have. They don't have any discourse. They don't have any reason to think, is this real photography? They just do what comes naturally to them. And I think trying to define the new medium of image making as photography really raises a lot of very serious mistakes. And I think it's not helpful for a new medium, which are a lot of people who are quite naturally taking to it, quite naturally expressing themselves through it, with sound, with motion, with the ability to change the image completely. The old medium of photography is fine, but it isn't the zeitgeisting medium that it was. The old medium of photography was a great medium, but it isn't what's happening now. I think before, when one was working just for print, there's this sort of strange feeling of a gap between yourself and your audience, which I think is established, I mean, cynically I could say is established, in a way that, the art gallery, the record company, the publishing house pushes a large gap between the audience and the artist to make the artist and the art seem more special. So if you want it, the more removed they are from everybody, the more special they seem, and the more value they appear to have. I always find it rather frustrating. It's not that I mind the value, but I dislike this false distance. And the way that photography and image making was presented before was very much, you saw images in a gallery or saw images in a magazine, and it was so devoid of any contact with the artist and the audience. It felt a very arrogant position. And that's not how I see my image making in any case. I don't create a series of images as a set of trophies, as a set of statements. Well, I always see my image making as part of an ongoing quest to understand the world around me and the questions that life throws up. And I think having SHOWstudio has allowed me to feel a lot more at ease with my working process. So I don't feel this disjunct, this separation between my work and my audience. I think it's always important to allow people to see how things are made, to allow people to see the process, because then you understand the art better. If we think generally of art as communication, then the more fully you can communicate, the better. So allowing some sort of system where you can see the process of creating a piece of art, I thought was really important, and I still think is really important. And I think it's probably good for the artist and the audience. So I think everybody benefits. So there were some good, strong, fundamental reasons to start SHOWstudio. New relationship with an audience, giving fashion film a platform, and also some sort of way of allowing people to see the process of making fashion imagery. It is a really exciting time for fashion film, but it is just in its infancy. So if I had to say what I really hoped SHOWstudio would achieve, if it could show fashion and allow people to understand fashion in the way that I've seen it over my career, the really truly exciting, truly artistic, and truly innovative medium that fashion is, then I think SHOWstudio would have achieved something. I think it makes the world feel that actually fashion isn't something we should be ashamed of, it isn't vanity, it isn't a sin. It's actually a way of self-expression. It's probably the most basic form we have of self-expression. And I think if SHOWstudio can demonstrate that in an enlightening and an entertaining way, I think that would be a really good thing to have achieved.